5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, it wouldn't be Pennsylvania Newsmakers on a weekend before an important hearing on what? A recount of the presidential vote in Pennsylvania. We'll talk about that with a couple of the state's leading reporters. But first, as you gather around face-to-face holiday season, what are you going to do when you start to talk about long-term care? We'll get into that with an expert on that subject after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back to the program. Well, we're going to start, first of all, talking about long-term care. We bring an expert in here, Russell McDaid. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. Russ, as always, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
I love the way when in the material that we exchanged, or that you sent to me, you said we're going to sit down together as families, as friends, as intimates, as cronies, however we sit down, right? And guess what? There are important problems that we're going to talk about, even though this is a joyous season, right?
That's absolutely correct. And we've spoken before.
Yeah.
We sit down. Our families all spend a lot of time planning a vacation and saving for a vacation. We spend a lot of time planning for college and saving for college.
We hope we do.
We hope we do.
Yeah,
Few
right.
of us spend that time planning for our long-term care, and there's no better time than the holiday season when families come back together, when sons and daughters from across the country are back home together, working with their parents or their grandparents to say, when the need arises, do we have the knowledge and the things in place we need to make good choices for our family?
Yeah. How many people, and I know you know this, how many people would you estimate are in a long-term situation in our state?
We've got, roughly right now, we've got about 80,000 on a daily basis in nursing
That's
facilities.
a fairly large-sized city, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's a significant challenge for us as a state. We're old and we're getting older, and oftentimes our conversation at the policy level, centers around where people ought to be served. The reality is we're getting older as a society. Yeah. People are going to need all types of long-term care, and now's the time to have those conversations.
Yeah. And what does it look? How would you describe it in Pennsylvania at this point?
Yeah, well, Pennsylvania, people need to first understand what's out there. Many people know about long-term nursing facilities. Those are the 24/7 skilled settings, where when someone needs heavy, intensive skilled nursing care, we're talking they have an IV, they have a feeding tube, they may even be on a ventilator of some type, that those individuals get that on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week basis. The next level down in Pennsylvania, there's assisted living residences and personal care homes. Those are also 24/7 settings where your care needs are met. The folks who would reside in those settings need a little less care. Yeah. They don't need the heavy, intensive medical care. They need assistance with going to the bathroom, bathing, maybe getting up and down the stairs, making their meals, some cueing on, hey, it's time to take your medications.
These are big decisions. So, just anecdotally, and I know this is not scientific, when I run into people who live in a facility, they're still active and they love it. They formerly had, homes they were taking care of. They really do. They love the camaraderie with other people, the ability to sit down, have breakfast or lunch or dinner in a common setting and be able to do recreation. And I think that helps sustain people when you reach these so-called golden years, right? That the interaction that you get with other people. It's something,
absolutely.
You're not isolated.
That's right. Our members see that all the time. We have someone they've done everything they can to avoid that day that's going to come when they need to move into a facility. And once they move in, they have socialization. They have dinner partners. They have friends who they're playing cards with in the afternoon.
They're not living isolated, waiting for a call from a relative. And I don't mean that meanly, because everybody lives busy lives. But go ahead, Finney.
Well, no, and we have Skype now. So, a lot of folks Skype back and forth with grandchildren from across the globe or across the country, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. Isolation, we know for our seniors, can be one of the most damaging things to their health. And many of our facilities, and our member facilities in particular, can end that isolation so that they have a robust social life.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I'm going to ask Russ about, there are lots of choices. How do you know that you made the right one? Russ is going to help us out after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, now celebrating 100 years as the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
I'm chatting with Russ McDaid. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. We're getting into the whole business of senior care living. All right, so how do you know, you sit down, you're having this conversation, how do you know you made the right choice?
Well, yeah, first you got to have the conversation and ask the question and sit down and say, look, this is an important issue for all of us as a family, mom, dad, whomever. If the time would come when you can no longer safely take care of yourself here in the home, what would we do? That starts the conversation. Then you start researching options. And we, on our website at the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, we have a link, www.findpacare.org, and I think our viewers will be able to see that link during the show, Terry.
Okay. It's right there now. It's on this.
That'll help you kind of get a sense of what's out there and what's available. And we've always said, and when you and I have discussed this in the past, do some research, pick some options, and then go visit. And go get a sense of what's out there, what the options are. Talk to staff and other residents and families and see whether it's the right fit for you.
And maybe you know somebody who's already in a facility, right? Who can talk about what life is like, what they should look for. That's great advice. Now the other aspect of this is, why are the holidays a good time to do this? Because we all get together and we don't do that in some families frequently? Yes.
In essence, yeah. I know we all might think, hey, there are better times than around, the Thanksgiving table that just passed for many of us, or the upcoming holiday tables that are as we move forward. It's an uncomfortable time if we're not going to be talking about the election results, which you're all getting to next.
That's even more uncomfortable.
That might be a little more uncomfortable than talking about long-term care, but it's never easy to talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's no better time. And if we let it go, we know most people run into problems because this comes up unexpected. Long-term care isn't something that's kind of a journey.
Right.
It happens. There's an event. My own grandmother fell in her driveway. That started her long-term care journey. She broke a hip, and that started her journey unexpectedly. And if we hadn't done the planning beforehand, it would have been a much more difficult process for the family.
Now, but as you say, there are people who just simply say, I don't want to do this. I'm comfortable in my own home. I mean, that's not an easy decision to move people to get, they've been in a home in some cases 30, 40 years, even longer, and all of a sudden you say, well, you're going let's talk about going somewhere else.
Well, I hope it's not an easy decision. I think, first of all, there's some, the kids probably aren't all even in the same place. You're not getting rid of my bedroom versus, holidays are a time to start the conversation, not necessarily finish it. We all know, I frankly work best by someone introducing an idea to me first, and I'll say no the first time. I may say no the second time.
You want to mull it over.
I'm mulling it over, and I'll come to that conclusion myself.
Yeah.
And so helping our loved ones and our parents start thinking through, well, gee, these are things I need to think about. I do need to plan for where I might end up. That's really important for a family. So when that time comes, usually it's almost almost always a much better conversation than it would have been if it was the proverbial crisis.
All right. Well, look, thanks for coming in. I think this is very helpful. I hope that I'm sure the viewers out there have gotten some helpful tips, and we had your website URL up, so they'll be able to log on to that and check it out. All right, coming up, we have a recount going on in some counties, but not others, and we also have a Commonwealth Court hearing coming up on Monday on a recount asked by supporters of Jill Stein. We'll see where all that goes with a couple of the state's leading reporters, and we'll do that after we pay some bills.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Well, we got a couple of big topics to deal with. How about this whole business of the recount? On Monday, there'll be a hearing in Commonwealth Court. We want to talk about the vote recount that supporters of Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, have instituted in our state and two others. We're also going to talk about the unemployment compensation call centers. And joining me to do that is Steve Esack with the Allentown Morning Call and Marc Levy with the Associated Press. All right, Marc, let's start with you. This is beyond complicated. You're smiling. Am I right about that?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, it's beyond complicated, but the gist of it is that under Pennsylvania law, it's fairly easy to apply for a recount in individual voting districts, of which there are over 9,100. So where does this all stand now?
Well, what the Green Party is doing is sort of two-pronged. One, they've gone to a state court to seek a court order for a statewide recount. On a precinct level, they've had voters go to county boards or county courts to seek precinct-level recounts in a scattered number of precincts and a scattered number of counties around the state. Most of these counties are the heavily populated ones: Allegheny, Philadelphia, Chester,
Lancaster, the county I live in, right? Yeah.
So they're getting a mixed reception in the counties, but I think the hearing that everyone's going to pay attention to is Monday at the state level. It's apparently an unprecedented court action that they're seeking. They're filing under a law that allows you to contest an election, but contesting an election hasn't really ever been linked with a statewide recount in a presidential election.
I got it. So the whole point here is, and Steve, there's no real possibility. Donald Trump won 70,000 plus. Right. There's no real possibility this election is the outcome is going to be overturned, is there? I mean,
no. I mean, mathematically, I think it's impossible. But as Marc mentioned, it is a two-pronged process here. So yesterday, being Wednesday in Lehigh County, in the Lehigh Valley, they did a recount in 6 precincts. There were 3 discrepancies found.
3 and 6 voting districts.
Yeah, they had to do with like absentees, one with someone in the military. So 2 votes went to Clinton, 1 went to Pat Toomey. So that shows you just how far the chances are just impossible. But then again, I think that this is what you get when you have a presidential candidate, being President-elect Donald Trump, talking about a rigged system. Then someone's going to go and file these kind of petitions.
And I don't think, by the way, I don't think he helped himself here when he said there was 2 to 3 million votes cast illegally. I mean, now we're talking, now he didn't mention, obviously, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. He mentioned New Hampshire, Florida, and some other states. So, I mean, that just sort of opens the door, maybe I'm wrong, needlessly, in an election now where he's over 300 electoral votes.
Right.
He's over 300. The fact is that the election's not going to be overturned. And Marc, you've covered a lot of these in your days with the Associated Press. Do you agree with Steve? This is not likely to overturn the election, is it?
Well, the deeper issue that the Green Party is trying to get to, overturning the election aside, the deeper issue they're trying to get to is, did a foreign government,
Russia,
did some sort of adverse interest hack into voting machines and shift just enough votes to put Donald Trump over the top? These were sort of the fears that played out during the campaign when it was believed by the federal government that the Russian government was behind the hack of various top aides to Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee. Despite
the fact that not one of the 9,100 plus voting in those districts, in those machines, are online.
That's true, but if you read the court file in the
and I know you did,
right? Yeah, and I did. The expert opinion from the computer scientist from the University of Michigan says they don't need to be online. The hackers can hack into the state system because the state then takes a flash drive basically and delivers that to all the counties. That's the computer expert's theory. I don't know if that's actually true or what, and I don't know what the judges are going to say in Commonwealth Court, but according to him, you don't need to be hooked online.
All right, we're going to run to a break. The host not supposed to have a lot of positions. I just think we can do some election reform. I'm in favor of that, and we can talk about that sometime if it gets proposed. We'll have you guys back and we can chat about it. Overturning over 70,000 votes, not likely. All right, when we come back, there's a big issue with the unemployment compensation call centers. I know this sounds removed and remote, but it could lead to a much more bigger situation in this state. We'll talk about that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Welcome back. I'm chatting with reporter Steve Esack and Marc Levy. We're talking about a variety of things. We're now going to turn to an issue, and I'm going to start with you, Steve. Unemployment compensation call centers. There's a rift over the money. There's suggested that maybe more than 500 employees could lose their jobs. What's important about that? Why has this become such a contentious issue between the governor and some Republicans?
Well, this is the money for these call centers is extra on top of what's already in the budget. And it has to do with like about $57 million. There's a technology upgrade that has to continue. The House passed that funding bill. The Senate was, according to the governor's office, was supposed to pick up that bill to help with this funding. The Senate didn't pass that bill toward the end of the legislative session. And again, in November, Governor Wolf says, because you didn't do that, we're going to lay off roughly 500 employees at these call centers. These call centers are responsible for answering people's calls about unemployment compensation. The 3 call centers now where these people could be laid off are in Republican districts, one in Lehigh County, one in Lancaster, one out in the Altoona area, I believe. The Senate, Republican-controlled Senate, is turning around and saying, hey, the governor could have found this money in the budget elsewhere.
Let me
and
ask
we're
you
not
this
gonna pay
question.
for
Let me
more.
ask you this question.
Yeah.
This was passed overwhelmingly in the House. I'll be
Yes.
off on the vote, something like 180 or 90 to 20 or something like that. Bipartisan support. It goes to the Senate and they drop it. And now you've got 500 plus people who could lose their jobs because they can't get together on this 50-some million dollars to make these upgrades so that the bureaucracy can be effective. Am I wrong about that?
It's sort of hard to see how this happened if indeed there was talk about it all year long between the Wolf administration and the Senate Labor Committee. This bill progressed through these committees. It popped out of the Senate Appropriations Committee in the late days of the session in October. But the Senate has shut down for the year. They're done. November 30th was their last day. And the governor, I believe, had said, or at least the Department of Labor and Industry has said that December 19th is the last day for these 3 centers to stay open. 500-some employees get laid off. There's no other money he can shift because the money that pays for it comes from the unemployment tax that employees pay.
Why over the years have I not seen governors find ways to get to come up? I mean, you know, you've watched them too move money around. I'm not saying he can or he can't, but
Well, that's what the Senate is saying. The governor could have moved this around.
Money around.
Governor Wolf is saying you went back on your word. You told us you were going to do this. We warned you months ago that if this didn't happen, we'd have to lay people off.
Right.
So now it becomes this political dance right before Christmas. Ho, 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 here come these people who could
going to lose their job.
Yeah,
and by the way,
job.
is this taking on an aspect that of the governor's election in 2018 where you have a very prominent Republican state senator from York, Scott Wagner? There were demonstrations in front of his office. If you'll correct me if I'm wrong about that, Mark. And then you have the governor, and Scott Wagner has already said he's going to run, a very wealthy guy who's been involved in campaigns, meaning overseeing the campaigns for Republicans, picked up seats as a result. Is there something going on here?
It's quite possible. I mean, look, everything in the Capitol is political all the time.
Good point.
But there's no question that Scott Wagner, the senator from York, a Republican, has been outspoken on this issue and the need to find efficiencies and save money in state government.
Meaning it shouldn't be done?
No, well, he's saying the Senate appropriated this money a long time ago. Why isn't the technology upgraded by now? If it's not upgraded, you need to fire the people who didn't get that job done.
I get it. So this is Is this kind of a forerunner, Mark, to what we could see coming up beginning next year when the governor's race begins?
It certainly looks like a lousy start to the next stage of the relationship between the Republican-controlled Senate and the Democratic governor, and we have a very ugly budget season coming up with a massive deficit.
You're going to get the last words on an ugly budget session. We'll have to have you guys back because I agree with you. I think it's going to be a long, contentious budget fight. All right, we're not going to fight with our viewers. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.